we are not alone.
These are supposed to be some of the most verified images of giants.
People who do meditation for 60 days will lengthen their telomeres.
Soon we'll get results, and we'll let you know right here on Beyond Belief.
Things seem to be changing in the field of ufology.
It's going to be a bumpy ride.
That's priceless.
Isn't that amazing?
Tesla wanted free energy, and look what happened to him.
Plenty of evidence to show that they're real. The real question is how and why.
There were Egyptian hieroglyphs out in the outback of Australia.
In Australia. What are the possibilities? Mars was inhabited, and these were built.
We almost can't duplicate today. These are amazing topics.
What if there was something like at Area 51 deep underwater?
They were killed by some animal.
Believe me, we're just getting started. I'm George Norrie, and we here at Gaia are committed to revealing the truth.
Okay, welcome back to Coast. You all know Giorgio Tsoukalos. He's been on with me many times, and he also stars in Ancient Aliens. Giorgio has often been described as the real-life Indiana Jones. He's a trailblazer, publisher of Legendary Times, and here he is back on Coast to Coast. Giorgio, always a pleasure.
Same here, George. Great pleasure to be back. Thank you so much for having us.
Giorgio, tell me, first of all, did you always have the high hair that you have now?
No, this was an organic byproduct. You know, I discovered the electric socket, and people loved it, and here we are.
They did love it, and it's you. It's become like some people will wear bow ties and things like that. Your hair has become synonymous with who you are.
Well, look, if my hair gets people to talk about extraterrestrials, then what more can I ask for?
Giorgio, you have worked with Eric von Däniken. He's still going strong. He was a great influence for me in studying ufology and getting into broadcasting because I wanted to unravel these stories. How did you get to know Eric von Däniken?
Well, this was actually because I was introduced to Eric at a fairly young age, around 6 or 7, when my grandma read to me as bedtime stories, Chariots of the Gods or Edgar Cayce's Atlantis, those different ideas of an alternative history of mankind. But because I grew up in Switzerland, when I learned that he was also in Switzerland, when I was in my early teens, 14, 15, I started to hang out and go to his lectures. And I became friends with him and his circle of friends. And then in 1998, when the former Ancient Astronaut Society, Dr. Gene Phillips, decided to retire and not continue his research society, I approached Eric and I said I'd like to take over start an American branch of Eric von Däniken's research society, the AASRA. And here we are.
I remember being at an event with him. I think you were there too, Giorgio, years ago. And we were after the event. We were all at a restaurant and sharing a glass of wine or two. And the waiter came up to us and said, "What would you like, sir?" And I said, "Give me a glass of Merlot." And he goes up to Eric von Däniken and he went, "Give me a bottle of Merlot." One of a kind.
Always a good time with him, yes.
One of a kind. His theory on the ancient astronauts, of course, through his book, is controversial, and it wasn't accepted right away. People in the field kind of argued with him a little bit about it, didn't they?
Sure, absolutely, and I think that we've definitely seen a change of tides because, in this day and age, you'd be hard-pressed to find any astrobiologist who would dispute the fact that life exists elsewhere in the universe. That's almost, even though we cannot pinpoint it, we really don't have a tangible piece of evidence as of yet, even though one could argue that as well, that we do have that with some microscopic pictures of meteorites that we found and things like that. However, today, the one taboo topic is no longer whether life exists out there. The taboo topic now is it possible that that life out there has already been here.
Exactly.
And therein lies the difference.
And, of course, I was at AlienCon a couple weeks ago in Santa Clara with Giorgio. Kevin Burns was there, too. But as I'm walking through the crowd, and it was just an immense crowd, there must have been close to 10,000 people there. There's this huge line, and I'm going, I've got to get through these people. So I'm getting through them, but they're saying, "Hey, George, how are you?" I come to find out that I'm at the end of a line of maybe hundreds of people for Kevin Burns' book, Ancient Aliens, the official companion book. And I think the mistake that so many people who are skeptics about visitation, they all talk in terms of our propulsion systems. And there's no way, of course, they're going to get here the way we go out into space. They've learned how to do something different. Giorgio, what do you think it is?
Well, no, you hit the nail on the head because, I find it always very fascinating, and it's quite understandable that we approach the extraterrestrial question by looking at it from a human perspective, which inherently makes it complicated, because even though the ancient astronaut theory suggests that we are hybrids, that we are their offspring, it still, doesn't answer a whole bunch of these questions that are at hand. And so I think it's quite fascinating.
So, Giorgio, so what's next for you with the program? Where does it go next?
Well, right now, actually, I have a couple of more lectures that I have to attend, and then I'm looking forward to a quiet holiday season. But we're actually in the process of setting up some shoots in Japan and perhaps even India, because I was just there for a promo tour for the premiere of a new season in Southeast Asia, and we ended up in Japan. And for the first time ever, was I able to check out some of the museums there. And, I always knew that Japan was an interesting place for the ancient astronaut theory. But until you visit some of these places, you have no idea what you're talking about, because standing there in front of some of these artifacts, some of which I had never seen before, new discoveries or something that I've, like I said, never seen before, that is very exciting. And so I'm very happy that the Japanese branch of the History Channel is interested in getting us there for a potential 1-hour show, and that's in the works right now. And I can't wait to return to that country, because there are some megalithic sites in Japan that blow other places out of the water.
Oh, yeah. This planet's been visited, and there are so many things out there. Let's talk a little bit about the pyramids when we come back in just a moment, and a little bit more about your work, Kevin, the book, Ancient Aliens, the official companion book. Folks, if you love the TV show, you're going to love the book, Ancient Aliens. Kevin Burns with us and Giorgio Tsoukalos. Next hour, we'll take your phone calls with them about this incredible program and about the incredible possibilities that this planet has been visited by extraterrestrials from other planetary systems, maybe other dimensions as well. We'll be back. Okay, welcome back to Coast, back with Kevin Burns, of course, creator of Ancient Aliens, and Giorgio Tsoukalos, superstar of Ancient Aliens as well. Giorgio, where have you not gone? You've traveled everywhere, haven't you?
Almost. This is why I'm very excited about this possibility of perhaps going to India, because India is one of the few places that I know a lot about, but I haven't been there personally. And so if some of the destinations that we have on the docket come true, then, what I've always spoken to with Kevin as well is that this journey that Ancient Aliens has taken me on has been absolutely, and I may just say it has been out of this world, because, I have been to places that I never thought I would even see in my dreams. And so, I want to thank Kevin, I want to thank Prometheus and the History Channel, and above all, I want to thank the fans who have embraced the show with such love, because otherwise, without the fans, without the ratings, we wouldn't be here. And so I think that all of us, the three of us, should thank our listeners.
Oh, we do.
Thank our audience, because they're the ones who are right there with us on the journey. And I'm very, very I feel very honored to have so many people along on this journey with us together.
Good for you, Giorgio. And Giorgio, you've had fun doing this too, and that's so important, isn't it?
Yes, I mean that's the short answer. I mean it's been tremendous fun. In fact, I mean, being able to travel the world and investigating true mysteries. I've never been to Loch Ness. I've never been to Portugal. These are all different places that you dream about going to, and to be able to go there, not just to investigate this, but with a competent team that makes everything run so smoothly. That to me, it's truly an amazing experience, and I find it tremendous that the shows have received such a tremendous love by the audience, and it basically shows that somehow we've struck a chord, and that I think is wonderful, because people have these enduring questions, and in this day and age, some of those answers that we've been given for hundreds of years may no longer be satisfactory, and therefore shows like Ancient Aliens come along to present a different viewpoint. Not everything that we talk about is particularly, let's say, in my wheelhouse. So whenever I see something that I have to talk about, it's like going back to school. I go to my books, I scour the internet to find out, what is it now that the team at Prometheus has found out. And more often than not, I am incredibly pleased that, this crack team of researchers find stuff that some of us haven't heard before. And I think that is a great testament to the team at Prometheus.
Been doing lately?
Well, I've actually been very, very busy. I consider myself very blessed, and as you know, but I would like to share this with our listeners, back in 2009, I was consulting producer of a little television show called Ancient Aliens.
I have had more response to that little television show, Giorgio.
It's a bit of an understatement, isn't it?
You did a great job on that.
But we are, in fact, currently filming Ancient Aliens, the series, and we just filmed you a few weeks ago, and we're in the process of putting everything together. We're almost in post-production, and the show will air on the History Channel, 5 episodes starting this April. So anyone that's listening, please tune in to the History Channel in April. It's called Ancient Aliens, the series, and in most likelihood it will be aired on Saturday nights. So now you finally have something to do on Saturday.
Obviously, the History Channel liked what you did on that first show.
Well, it was, the idea was always to sort of write a love letter to Chariots of the Gods, which was Eric's seminal work back in 1970. And, you've seen the program, and I'm sure many of Coast to Coast listeners have watched the program as well. And this was truly one of the first programs ever that put the ancient astronaut theory in a positive light and presented in a way that it's downright conceivable that, we're aware ourselves that most of the stuff we talk about sounds completely off the wall. But if you look at it from a, scientific perspective, then after a while, after digging through the surface, you have to come to the conclusion that, yes, something happened in our remote past. And of course, in the ancient astronaut theory, it means that Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials in the remote past.
Yeah, I had an opportunity, Giorgio, to talk with Eric von Däniken on the program several months ago.
Wonderful.
And
he told me about it.
He has as much energy now as he had when his Chariot of the Gods book came out decades ago.
And he is writing book number 31, and Career Press just announced that his latest book, Twilight of the Gods, will be published here in the United States in July of this year. So all very exciting. History is Wrong was his last book that he published in English. That book did really well. But, someone who has already read his book, Twilight of the Gods, which is called Götterdämmerung in German, someone who's already read that, like me, I can tell you it blows most all of his books out of the water because it's absolutely ironclad, and it's very very well researched and just magnificent. So everyone should just look forward to it. It's going to be amazing.
We're going to give people one ride tonight, but before we get into this journey, tell me a little bit more about you, Giorgio. How you got interested in the ancient astronaut theory? How you and Eric got together? Where you and now are the director of the Center for Ancient Astronaut Research. How'd that all happen for you?
Well, that actually, the interest in the alternative history of mankind has basically been instilled on me since I was a child growing up in my home, because especially my grandma, she was very much tuned into all these subjects. And for example, I've had the privilege to travel all around the world with my parents, who were avid travelers, and they made sure that we would go to all the museums and all the archaeological sites, just as a real life education on site, this and that. But whenever I would come home, my grandma would say, "Look, now you've learned these particular mainstream ideas of this site and that site, but let me show you something else." And so she would read to me, books by Eric or books by anyone, the unsolved mysteries of the world. So that type of discussion at my home was dinner table stuff, and especially also my mom. She's always said, and I never quite understood as a little child what she meant by this, but of course, as you grow older, you change, your brain grows, and you understand what she meant. And what she basically said was that everything that exists today, like technology-wise, she always said that she thinks that all of this has already existed before at some point in time. And I never knew what she meant. And today we laugh about it because, both of my parents are, they're doctors and all this. And so I'm the only non-doctor, non-attorney, non-engineer, non-whatever in my entire family.
But you're having fun.
I'm having a lot of fun. But I'm always saying to my parents, I'm saying, look, it's your fault. You talked to me about this when I grew up,
That's
so,
right.
Just don't say anything.
My mother did the same thing to me. My father wanted me to become a dentist. She would bring me books that Walter Sullivan, the late New York Times science writer, wrote called We Are Not Alone. She'd pull out Look magazine when they had the Benny and Barney Hill Interrupted Journey story. So, she got me into all this, too. And I told her just a few weeks ago, I said, "Mom, you're the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today. Dad wanted me to be a dentist."
And this is why, after all, we can definitely be grateful to our parents and our grandparents, because we're definitely a product of the environment that we grew up in. And, we're testament to this.
Well, and I've made them both happy, Giorgio. One, I'm doing this program, which she adores. Two, I go to the dentist twice a year for my dad. Everybody wins, right?
Exactly.
Tell me a little bit about the stories of creation, because that's important to get into everything we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and that is really a great question to start off with, because here's the very interesting idea or concept of the ancient astronaut theory, and it basically suggests that a long, long time ago, extraterrestrials visited in the Earth in the remote past. And so it doesn't matter what ancient culture you look at, all of those cultures have what's considered a creation story. And what's really interesting, regardless if the story comes from the east, from the west, from the north, or from the south, all creation stories at their core are literally identical, because what you have there is that everything starts in complete darkness. And out of this complete darkness, or sometimes also referred to as the chaos or the deep dark void, a type of egg or a cosmic egg emerges from far, far away. Sometimes the egg is referred to as being silver in color, sometimes it's referred to as being golden in color, and that egg then descends onto Earth And when the egg then cracks open and there is this bright light that emanates from it, and from there all creation begins. Now, not all these eggs crack open. Sometimes a heavenly ladder descends or is lowered from these cosmic eggs, out of which these heavenly teachers descend and teach mankind in all sorts of different disciplines. Now, we all know that cosmic eggs in that sense do not exist. So the question that I ask is, well, what did our ancestors mean when they talked about these cosmic eggs? And, so we have references to cosmic eggs. We also have references to cosmic pearls, cosmic turtles, cosmic snakes, winged snakes, flying shields, and flaming shields. So, and if you look at it from a very rudimentary point of view, all those shapes are pretty much identical or similar. I mean, a turtle can be compared to an egg. So what is it that our ancestors tried to describe or circumscribe what they saw or witnessed, or what their ancestors witnessed, so that it was compelling enough for them to put it in writing or into their traditions? Because at the outset of this program, I would like to state very clearly that our ancestors had the same brains that we have today, which means they were as intelligent as we are today. The only difference is that their technological frame of reference was different than what we have today. So therein lies the difference. Our ancestors were not stupid. On the contrary, they were as smart as we are today. However, when they got in contact with flesh and blood extraterrestrials, they did not comprehend the nuts and bolts aspects behind those visits, and thus turned it into something spiritual, something divine, something magical. Even though, by the way, I do not deny the spiritual world or the divine. Of course not. I am a deep believer in God. Of course, then the question is, what is your idea of God? I mean, it's certainly not anything out of the Old Testament, for example. But that's a whole other discussion.
That's another show.
Yeah, so there we have all these different creation stories that in and of itself are identical. And when, scientists, mainstream scientists come along and say, well, all of this is just fantasy, it's all just invented stories, that to me is an insult in the face of our ancestors.
Well, I agree with you, Giorgio, because let's say 50 years ago, if you put an iPhone in front of somebody 50 years ago, they would have no idea what it was. Exactly. But they would try to describe it the best way they could, and they'd come up with something, and that if people looked back 50 years from then, right around now, let's say, and we read that description, we'd say, boy, that's pretty weird. How they tried to come up with it, what they tried to explain.
Absolutely, and that is what is so fascinating, that in biblical times, we actually have references of magical glowing stones with which people were able to see the world and with which people received teachings. What were our ancestors describing? Did magical glowing stones really exist? Or if you place a laptop, or like what you just said, an iPhone in front of someone who has never seen something like this, and, propel yourself back 5,000 years, and you have, you bring a laptop with you, that laptop would become a magical tablet. And then imagine you put a DVD and you play a scene from the Grand Canyon on that. Well, that is just astonishing to whoever sees this 5,000 years ago. And thus we create a story that later then is relegated into the realm of fantasy, which it never was.
Giorgio, let's talk a little bit about Genesis. And again, here's another episode of what could have been an interpretation of ancients
for what they saw. Explain.
Well, of course. I mean, and of course, Genesis, and I'm sure that many of our coast-to-coast listeners are very familiar with this, and that is the fact that if we read Genesis, then there is one particular sentence in there that says, "And then God created man in their image." And grammatically speaking, that sentence really doesn't make any sense. And of course, the theologians are saying that, you know, the there in that sentence has to do with the Holy Trinity and all this stuff. But if you look at it from the original perspective, when you look at the word God, then in the original Hebrew, the word for God is Elohim. And Elohim, and any, you know, true scholar, if they were to translate that word correctly into correct English, the word Elohim is a plural form. It means the gods. So then, if you rewrite that sentence, the sentence correctly would have to read, "And then the gods created man in their image." So that is one of the basic tenets of the ancient astronaut theory. One thing is crystal clear, that, you know, the fossil record exists. There is no denial in that. But something happened because there was a quantum leap when we were literally munching bananas in caves, and then all of a sudden we're building civilization.
Yeah, all of a sudden we're pretty intelligent, aren't we?
Yes, and so that is what even Charles Darwin referred to. Look, Charles Darwin in his Origin of Species himself said, "I like my theory, and I have to agree with him." You know, a lot of stuff that he wrote in Origin of Species is great. However, even he himself said, but something I can't wrap my mind around, and that is why today we have the infamous missing link. And that missing link is where there is no transitional period between any of the previous humanoid species, none of our human ancestors, that, you know, they all just appeared and disappeared. There is no transitional form. And so the ancient astronaut theory is that particular missing link.
Do you travel much when you do this research?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see, that is one thing that the you know, members and also the researchers of the Center for Ancient Astronaut Research can pride themselves in, that we actually go to the places that we write about, because unfortunately we live in the time of Photoshop.
Giorgio, tell us a little bit about the theory of the possibility of an atomic war, an ancient atomic war.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely one of the tentpoles of the ancient astronaut theory, because in ancient Indian texts we have concise references of, looked at from a modern perspective, would suggest some type of an atomic explosion, or atomic explosions, plural, actually. And, you know, the debunkers are saying that all of this is nonsense, because in battle there are explosions, big explosions. And, you know, to be honest with you, my reaction to that argument is, okay, these texts are, you know, 4,000 years old. Did they, according to mainstream archaeology, really have explosions back then? And that is up for debate. But I'm leaning more towards the idea that no, they didn't. Nothing that was created by man, or by humankind anyhow. However, there are descriptions, and I've actually prepared a quote here from the Mahabharata. And what the debunkers are not looking at is the greater picture, because, you know, they're only fixating on one aspect of the story, and then they're ignoring all the rest. And those descriptions are very detailed. So there's a few lines. I'm just going to read it, but this is out of the Mahabharata, and it says that he hurled a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. A perpendicular explosion with its billowing smoke clouds, the cloud of smoke rising after its first explosion, formed into expanding round circles. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death. which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable.
Amazing.
Their hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all their food was infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams of water to wash themselves and their equipment. Now, I'm sorry, George, there are multiple references in here that speak directly of something that would have to do with a nuclear blast, because only if you suffer from radiation poisoning or from nuclear fallout do your nails fall out.
How old was that text, Giorgio?
About 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and this is from ancient India. And you see, and you know, if you read about a pillar of smoke, and you know that the smoke or the explosion formed into expanding round circles, you know, I mean, that is a mushroom cloud. And you know, there are all these other things, like, you know, that the soldiers threw themselves into streams of water to clean themselves. That's what you have to do after you come in contact with any type of radioactivity.
Absolutely. I mean, how clear can it be? It sounds like an obvious description to some kind of atomic attack. Now, who did it exactly and why, that's another story, isn't it?
Of course. But here's the bottom line, though, George, that you and I are crazy, right? Because we're looking at this, and by the mainstream, you know, the theories that we're proposing, even though they're crystal clear, and anyone with a half a brain can recognize this, and to even argue this, you know, the only reason why it's being argued anyway is because, unfortunately, the great majority of mankind, scientists and religionists included, think that we are the pinnacle of creation, that, you know, evolutionary, technological evolution, or even, you know, spiritual evolution or development has experienced a gradual evolution from point A to point B, from point B to point C, from bottom to top, and we are at the pinnacle. We're the greatest. We're the crown of creation. We're absolutely incredible. I mean, all we're doing, we're navel-gazing. We're the best. We're the greatest. We're amazing. Yet, you know, everything is cyclical. That what we're experiencing today is nothing else what's been going on for thousands of years. And, you know, it's an absolute blasphemy to suggest that a technology such as nuclear power, or at least atomic bombs, existed thousands of years ago. And we have physical evidence for this.
Now, tell me about this giant crater found just outside of Mumbai in India.
Right. I mean, I'm glad you bring that up, because, you know, that is basically, you know, it's called the Lonar Crater, which is located 400 kilometers northeast of Mumbai, and it's dated less than 50,000 years old, and it's this nearly circular 2,100-meter diameter crater.
It's huge.
It's huge, almost perfect.
And no remnants of an asteroid?
Nothing. No. And that is exactly what I was getting at, because the only way, and see, at the center of this structure, or of this crater, we have these basalt glass spheres that could have only been created if that area had been exposed to high degrees of heat. And no volcanoes in the area, by the way.
No.
And no meteorite. So, I mean, you know, nature can do amazing things, but at the same time, you know, sometimes you also have to go with logic. And if nature by herself cannot create something like this, well, then there's only one solution to this, and that is some type of an outside force besides nature created this, or, you know, had the effect of creating something like this.
Now, I'm going to ask you to speculate, because that's what this is, but I'm just curious to get your take, because I'm sure you've tried to think, what happened? What occurred? Why was there a battle?
Well, I mean, you see, here is the thing that, I sort of disagree with in the whole alternative history field, and that is, a lot of people, especially UFO people, they're always not, and of course I'm generalizing, George. I'm not saying that everyone is like this, but in general, everyone says that the moment that, extraterrestrials show up in their UFOs, all of our problems will be solved, everything will be great, we'll have, free energy, this and that. Now, while I think that is possible, I am more of the conviction that, how we have problems on this planet, there are problems out there. It's not all perfect out there. It's just a bigger version of everything that's going on here. There's good, and then there's evil. Everything, good and evil penetrates or encompasses the entire universe. And I'm also a believer that in the end, good outweighs the bad. However, so if we have those ancient texts where these battles are described, in my opinion, and, in Zechariah Sitchin's opinion, Eric von Daniken, and all other sorts of ancient astronaut theorists, is that those extraterrestrials who came here, there is a possibility that they crash landed. And so there were some types of mutinies going on where all of a sudden some people of the crew did no longer agreed with the commander, and so they started to have these factions, and these battles started. And we have very concise references for this. One example, for example, is Lucifer. I mean, Lucifer was a part of quote-unquote God's crew. And I'm not saying that God was an extraterrestrial, but I am suggesting that whoever or whatever was described in the Old Testament Bible was not God in that sense, but a misunderstood flesh and blood extraterrestrial. And so those ancient texts that describe these battles are between these quote-unquote gods that are fighting between each other. And just to be clear, whenever I say gods, and I know you agree with me on that one, it's always lowercase g.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with, capital G, God. And so, it is amazing that in ancient India, especially now that we're talking about these atomic explosions, were you aware that whenever these weapons of this incredible force, whenever they were deployed, they were always hurled from these flying machines called vimanas, and we have these concise descriptions of flying chariots in ancient Indian texts that were piloted by the gods. And still today, in the Hindi language, the word viman means airplane. So we have a surviving mythology in language that has survived to this day.
Absolutely. Now, there's a British researcher, his name of Indian origin, David Davenport. Mm-hmm. He spent at least 12 years studying ancient Hindu scripts, and he concludes that there was this atomic explosion 4,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting point here. In 1975, David Davenport published a book in India. He lived in India, but he published a book in Italy, and the title was 2000 Anticristo Distruzione Atomica, which in English means Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC. And in that book, Davenport claimed to have proof that Mohenjo-Daro, one of the oldest cities in the world of human civilization, had been destroyed by an atomic bomb. And what he basically proposed was that, and he basically just addressed mainstream archaeologists, because at Mohenjo-Daro, we have thousands of these glassy lumps, which are called the black stones. And they turn out to be fragments of clay vessels which had melted into each other in some type of an extreme heat. And that extreme heat, he proposes, was about 2,000 degrees centigrade, which is about 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. And when they got down to the levels of the skeletons of the people that died right there at Mohenjo-Daro, all of those people just lied there, unburied, hand in hand sometimes.
Like Nagasaki, like Hiroshima.
See, this is why I love talking to you, George. Exactly. And in fact, one Soviet professor or Russian, sorry about that, one Russian scholar back in the day when it was still the Soviet Union actually did research there, and they determined that one of the skeletons had a radiation level 50 times greater than normal. Now, this is all very wild stuff, and nobody talks about it.
This is incredible, truly incredible work. Is he still alive, do you know?
That, unfortunately, I'm not aware. I don't know. I don't know.
He would be a great one for your History Channel shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
If he's
for
still
sure.
out there. Well, we'll do some checking. Both of us will.
Wonderful.
There's another expert out there by the name of William Sturm, and I think he is still alive. He has said that the melting bricks at this town you just mentioned, how do you pronounce that?
Mohenjo-Daro.
Mohenjo-Daro could not have been caused. The melting bricks, he said, could not have been caused by a normal fire.
No, and Mohenjo-Daro is not the only place. We have also in Saudi Arabia, we have a site that has these spherules. We have that in the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, today's Israel, so, can you say Sodom and Gomorrah? I mean, there we have
Perfect.
a biblical
Great.
story that possibly describes some type of a atomic bomb that went off that, made Lot's wife turn into a pillar of salt. I mean, again, those stories, of course, are stories. They're legends. But what I'm after is the core. What compelled our ancestors to put this in writing, or at least put in their oral traditions, because they most certainly did not just sit around a campfire and, got drunk or were smoking dope, and then all of a sudden they were like, all right, well, what should we come up with tonight? No. What they wrote down and what they put in their oral traditions, it was their history. Just like today, we put stuff in the newspaper that really is going on. And to suggest that everything our ancestors, wrote down on paper is nothing but fantasy, who is insulting whom here? The mainstream scientists are insulting me and are saying that Eric and I and Zecharia Sitchin, that we're insulting our ancestors. But are we really? I don't think so, because the mainstream scientists are saying, in fact, that everything that we read in ancient times, we have to take it with a grain of salt because our ancestors just didn't get it. So everything was just divine, and everything had to do with the gods, and they did not exist. And it was just a way of coming to grips with the world. Now, that, to me, that is the slap in our ancestors' face.
And you've heard the stories of in the deserts of the Middle East, they see glass deep down, as if it was created by some kind of atomic explosion.
And that is what I'm actually referring to about Saudi Arabia. Exactly. Yes. So, and none of that stuff could happen by the sunlight alone, because, both you and I have been in the desert. It's incredibly hot. I mean, it's crazy. You just want to lay down and sleep. I mean, it is very hot.
It's hot, but you're not going to make glass this way.
Exactly. And again, in the desert, you don't necessarily have volcanic activity. So the only way that could have been possible is it was some type of a blast, or at least some technology that has been lost ever since.
Well, Michael Cremo, in his Forbidden Archaeology, talks about humankind being millions and millions of years old, and who knows what kind of technology we could have had. Though I think, Giorgio, you and I subscribe to the ancient astronaut theory, it is possible that we had intelligence on this planet that was humankind, and they blew themselves up as well.
Like we're about to?
Like we could.
Well, I don't mean to
That was
sound
kind of scary the way you said that.
Well, I mean, look, I'm always a guy that says that the glass is half full instead of half empty. But there's so many bizarre thinking people out there right now who, unfortunately, believe strongly, and I mean the word believe, not that they know. They believe it. There's faith involved about the end times. And that really concerns me because there's people in power who believe in the end times. And I think that's very disconcerting because, for example, the Maya never said that the world will end in 2012. They never said that.
Never.
So we should just get away from that. The world will go on. Everything will be fine because, this is not the end. So we should get away from this doom and gloom idea of.
Giorgio Tsoukalos, our special guest tonight. Giorgio, tell me about what you've been studying about ancient dragon myths and China's folklore and Native American Thunderbirds. I remember you talking about that when you were with me when you were taping the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Let's get into that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is all quite fascinating because if you look at the ancient myths of China, but also the Native American stories, the Chinese folklore or traditions, they refer to these dragons, and Native American traditions refer to the Thunderbirds. And, coming from the ancient astronaut perspective, I've always asked myself, did the ancient Chinese, did the Native Americans really truly mean that biological entities such as dragons or thunderbirds existed in real life? And I've pretty much come to the conclusion that once again, that is not necessarily the case, but that what we have here is another example of misunderstood technology. Now, mind you, I'm not the first to have come to this conclusion. In 1928, the American writer by the name of Berthold Laufer wrote a book by the name with the title "The Prehistory of Aviation," and in it there were a whole bunch of bizarre wood carvings that he saw or that he was able to look at when he visited China back in the day. And what surprised the author, and he was, by the way, he was also an anthropologist, so he was not just some tourist or something like this. I mean, he was a scientist. He was surprised that in all of these wood carvings that he saw in China, that there were all these very bizarre carvings of flying chariots that were drawn by dragons. And along with the texts that go along with these carvings, these dragons were always described to arrive with a lot of noise and thunder and smoke, and the earth was trembling. And then the moment those dragons, quote unquote, landed on the ground with their iron feet, out of their mouth or sometimes out of their belly, the first Chinese emperors came out. So, and they were always known as the divine rulers from the sky, the divine sky rulers, or the teachers from heaven. So, if you look at the same story in Native American myths, you have these references of the thunderbirds.
What we think are the big birds, right?
Exactly. And mind you, while, I will not, go ahead and knock cryptozoology, I mean, we don't know if any of those big birds truly exist.
Right. Or maybe they're pterosaurs. Who knows?
Exactly. However, if I have stories in Native American myth where these thunderbirds are described to come out of the deep, dark void, which in my opinion is another description for deep space, or sometimes referred to as the deep coldness or the deep emptiness or something like this. And then these thunderbirds descended in this big, amount of noise and smoke and the earth trembling again. And then out of their beak, they lowered their beak, and out of those beaks came what's called the kachinas, the heavenly teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all have seen kachinas. If you go to any type of, Native American souvenir shop, there are these wonderfully carved figures, many of which have an animal character to them, but some of them, if you look closely, they're wearing helmets, they have wings, they have these visors, very bizarre, renditions of
Extremely
these beings. And if you ask the Native Americans, they will tell you that the kachinas were, in fact, star people, and that those star people manifested themselves and then taught mankind in various disciplines. Now, when I hear the word manifested, then personally, I don't believe that those people came out of nowhere or those kachinas came out of the spiritual realm, but let's say they arrived in those quote-unquote thunderbirds. People were unable to see them right away, but they then manifested themselves the moment that thunderbird opened its beak and they were able to walk out of it. Now, the thunderbird, in the ancient national opinion, was some type of a vehicle with which they were able to travel from one place to the other. And so we have all these different references where, these thunderbirds are also sometimes referred to as being made of metal. And so were those dragons. And by the way, the Chinese traditions and the Native American traditions are not the only ones that speak of dragons or some type of flying birds. Even in ancient Greece, which obviously, is a much younger culture than China. However, around the island of Crete, there was a monster that was gleaming with a bronze, impenetrable skin. And anyone who has read the Argonautica with Jason and the Argonauts.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, that thing, that quote-unquote monster, was protecting the island of Crete. And the only way to conquer the monster is if you went down to its heel and you sort of unplugged this screw or this mallet made of bronze or gold, and the moment that screw was removed, this oozing black liquid, thick liquid removed the blood of the monster, and only then were you able to conquer the monster, because due to the lack of this liquid, all of its joints started to, lock up. Now, can you say oil? Or can you say some type of a hydraulic system?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously our ancestors, once again, and I cannot repeat myself with this enough, but our ancestors were highly intelligent, but their technological frame of reference was different than what we have today. So they had to describe it with the words and with the vocabulary that were at their disposal. So obviously, some type of a machine got turned into a monster, something out of this world.
Oh, if they had seen a submarine emerge,
exactly,
what do you think they would have said?
They would have said Jonah and the whale.
Yeah.
Because Jonah was most certainly not swallowed by a whale.
That's a good point.
Because
these events happened, but not the way they said.
Right. I mean, there's always, and this is why we live in such magnificent times right now, because we can look at these ancient texts from a modern perspective and recognize that stuff that we have today existed in one form or the other a long time ago.
You have sent us a couple pictures of massive monoliths that we've got posted at coasttocoastam.com. Explain these to us.
Well, the black and white picture that we have on coasttocoastam.com right now is a picture that was taken in the 50s of Baalbek in Lebanon. And Baalbek is a very popular site in all of the alternative history field. And the reason why it's so popular is the fact that this is, the site, well, this town was known as Heliopolis, where the sun god Baal was worshipped. And yes, the Romans later used this temple. It was one of the most magnificent temples that they ever had. However, even the Romans themselves said in their chronicles that they themselves stumbled upon the foundations of this temple way after this thing had been built in the remote past. And so if you look at this picture, the reason why I love it is because you have a tiny human being just leaning against the second level of stones. And then the third level above that human being, you see a massive, massive megalithic slab where, something like this, and I'm going to say it, George, we could not do today with none of our equipment. Because, now today on the National Geographic Channel and all those wonderful channels, you see, all this, what do you call it, mega builders or engineers, how they recreate stuff and they're transporting big blocks of stone or big blocks of steel and all of this. But the stones we have at Baalbek, especially what we see in this picture, we would have difficulties, if not impossible, to transport this from place A to place B. And this here is thousands of years old, and our ancestors allegedly did this with ropes, pulleys, and with wooden rollers. And I say, whoever suggests something like this is retarded. And I have no compunction of saying that.
Don't hold back, George.
Oh, I won't. I'm on a roll now. No, but the thing is, the bottom line is, and I would like to just go ahead and talk about the second picture that we have on coasttocoastam.com.
This is a strange one.
It is very much so. And the reason why I said that, anyone who suggests that our ancients were able to do this with chisel technology is retarded.
Primitive tools.
With primitive tools is retarded because For Ancient Aliens, the series, which will air in April, and we're all looking forward to it, and I hope everyone will tune in on the History Channel in April, we actually had the privilege, because there is something I wanted to do the first time around, and due to time constraints, we couldn't do it, but this time we were able to do it for the series, and that is, I wanted to go and talk to a real-life stone cutter, a real-life stonemason who, cuts stones for a living.
Yeah.
And we actually had the privilege
with good tools.
Exactly. And we had the privilege of doing this about 6-7 weeks ago. And so not only did we see what it takes today to cut a piece of granite, I mean, all I can tell you is it's very powerful, it's very loud, and it takes hours, okay? But we also, brought him pictures such as this one. And this carving of the stone block, especially I'm referring to the light gray stone block on the right, this can be found at my favorite site in the world, Pumapunku, in the highland of Bolivia, in the Andes, on the border of Peru and Bolivia, where Lake Titicaca connects the two countries.
It's one of Eric's good ones, too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, Twilight of the Gods, the new book that will be published, will have an entire section of that.
Beautiful.
And what we have here, while it doesn't look impressive size-wise, From a stone-cutting perspective, when I showed this to the stonecutter, he pretty much told me, Giorgio, please put this away. This is giving me a headache. Because he then also proceeded to say that today we could only do this with precision computer technology. And, the mainstream archaeologists are saying that we did this, or our ancestors did this. They carved this, allegedly, with chicken bones and with obsidian. Now, what we have here is diorite. Diorite is an extremely hard igneous rock, and I'm sorry, it doesn't work with chicken bones and with diorite. And you see, when you have especially the little square at the bottom that's the deepest, you can't cut that out, because the question that the stonecutter had is, how do you release the back of that rectangular or that square? You can't.
No, you can't at all. Why this planet, Giorgio? Why come here? Or do you think this was a mission of these ETs, and they just went to as many Earth-like planets as they could find?
Thank you very much. That would have been exactly my answer, because, obviously in our quadrant, our planet would stick out like a sore thumb. However, that does not mean that Earth is unique, that we're the only planet in our galaxy that is inhabited. I mean, just to, revive Carl Sagan, billions of galaxies are out there, billions of stars, each of which has planetary systems. I mean, to suggest that we're the only ones, which some scientists do, it defies logic. So, were they here? Absolutely. Did they also visit other planets? 100%. Because just like, all the stuff that we've seen, and I know it's a human creation, but, the worlds or the ideas behind Star Wars or Star Trek, I really think that the creators of those stories, Roddenberry and Lucas, they were onto something, that just like everything exists the way it does here on Earth, different races, different species, different everything, it exists out there. And some of them get along, some of them don't. And we're just this part of a bigger picture. And one day, hopefully, we'll have the privilege to join that big intergalactic club that's out there. It's not a right, by the way. It's a privilege, because right now we're a very, very dangerous planet. And, I doubt that they want any official participation of us in that club out there, because we're too violent.
Do you think the ETs that we're talking about are the alien Greys or the Nordics that look like us, or we look like them?
It could be all of them. You see, I don't think that we were visited by just one species, but multiple. And, your very last question right there is, do we look like them, is a resounding yes. Because, you see, the question is not, what do the extraterrestrials look like?
And you pull out Genesis, in God's image.
Exactly. So if extraterrestrials, quote-unquote, created us in their image, wouldn't that lead to the conclusion that who cares what the aliens look like? The bottom line is, the question that we should ask is, do we look like the aliens?
I want you to address this one for just a second, Giorgio, and that would be so many people who are staunch believers in the Word of the Bible, by the Word, and, they're hearing this tonight. I want you to temper that, because you've said time and time again, you believe in God.
Absolutely.
So explain that for me. Their belief in the Bible and the fact that it does not negate what you've been working on, and vice versa.
Right, because, you see, what we're working on is essentially to prove the point that not only have we been visited by extraterrestrials in the remote past, but that would inherently mean that the entire universe, or at least our galaxy, that there's at least one other species out there. Now, to me, that is a wonderful, wonderful thought in regards to religion, because it essentially means that God's creation was way bigger, way more magnificent than if, God would have only created life on earth. I mean, if we're truly, as some scientists and some religionists believe, if we're the only species in the entire galaxy, even in the entire universe, that to me would be an insult in the face of God's great creation, because it means that God essentially was only able to create us, and that is not very flattering.
Giorgio, the Ark of the Covenant. You've got some interesting things to say about this.
Yes. And my question is it actually possible whether or not the Ark of the Covenant is of alien origin?
Why would you think that?
Well, because there are multiple references in the Bible that essentially describe that, the Ark was needed to transport something. And according to popular belief, it was the tablet of Moses that were transported in it. However, if you look at the apocryphal texts, which used to belong to the Bible but are no longer part of the Bible since the Council of Nicaea, and also some of the ancient Hebrew texts, what we find there, especially in the Zohar, in what is a part of the Kabbalah, we have a description of what's referred to as the Ancient of Days. And the Ancient of Days, in popular idea, is thought to be a description of God. But back in the 70s, these two electrical engineers by the name of George Sassoon and Rodney Dale, they came to the conclusion that the Ancient of Days wasn't necessarily a description of God, but it was a description of some type of a machine. And this machine, the Ancient Days, correctly translated into English, would be the transportable one with the tanks. What tanks? What is described here? So they looked at this thing, this creature that was truly described in the Zohar. And by the way, anyone can go out and get a copy of the Zohar and read this. I mean, Gregory Mather's book, The Kabbalah Decoded, is one of the seminal works on the Zohar and the Kabbalah. And you read about this thing with, different faces and different brains and clear beards with tubes that went from one brain to the other, and these arms, and then this bright light which, forwarded this liquid inside, and then all of a sudden at night's end or in the morning, you have what's referred to as the manna. And, out of this machine, out of these tanks, the priests were able to siphon off this manna. Because if we look at the manna story, that it came from heaven, quote unquote heaven, the conventional ideas that it was the excretion of some insects or it was the morning dew or something like this, if you expose this to a little bit more scrutiny, none of those mundane explanations really hold water. So that is exactly what Sassoon and Dale were exploring. What is it that is behind this manna? And so, to make a long story short, they then explained or suggested that the manna machine that they called this machine that produced the manna was stored inside the Ark of the Covenant, which then was transported all over the place.
That's fascinating.
And so, also in medieval texts like Wolfram von Eschenbach and his Parzival legend and all the Arthurian legends, the idea is that the reason why the Templars were so many years in Jerusalem, they were there primarily to find this Ark of the Covenant, to find the Ark, and then to actually find the manna machine. And if we all look at Templar lore, they allegedly were in possession of what's called the Baphomet. And the Baphomet was this quote-unquote idol that they were accused of devil worship and, wrong things that they never actually did, but that this Baphomet had these glowing red eyes, and anyone who came close to it, started to have problems health-wise. And by the way, even the Ark of the Covenant, there are descriptions in the Bible that some people who went close to the Ark of the Covenant who were not the initiates,
they got electrocuted or something,
and
didn't they?
died. Some of them even lost their hair and lost their nails, and they had boils on their skin.
Sounds
on their
like
body.
Radiation poisoning.
Thank you. And that is what what Sassoon and Dale proposed, that this machine had a very, very small nuclear reactor inside of it. And I think that the Ark, there's two ideas. One, that it's hidden somewhere in Aksum, which is in Ethiopia, or
in a church, right?
Exactly, deep down in the ground, and only the guardian of that church is able to look at it. And by the way, all of these guardians, it's a sort of a family tradition or a family job. All of them have eye problems after about 20 years, which is very interesting because they allegedly aren't allowed to look at the Ark, and then something happens to their eyes. I mean, it can be a genetic effect that runs in that family, or it could be something else that we don't know of. I mean, it's highly fascinating. Now, the other idea is that we all know the story, and all Coast to Coast listeners know this, about the infamous money pit on Oak Island.
Yes, in Canada, right?
Exactly, in Nova Scotia and Halifax. And there we have this bizarre borehole where, for almost, for 100 years now, people have spent millions and millions of dollars to get to the bottom of this pit. And they've all failed miserably because of this ingenious flooding system that keeps on, flooding the shafts. And but what they've discovered is when they went down with endoscopic cameras is they found those boxes that are sort of the same size as is described, the size that the Ark of the Covenant was. And at one time, someone also determined that there were high levels of radiation down there. Now that, let me perk up because I was like, well, that is very fascinating. Now, one of the most eminent Ark of the Covenant researchers, Peter Feebog, actually was interviewed for Ancient Aliens, the series. So we're going to go into more detail about all of this when the series airs, and I can't wait to see what they've done with this.
Well, that is a fascinating possibility, Giorgio. It just adds to the puzzle, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, just the idea, I mean, if the Ark of the Covenant or the manna machine one day is recovered from the money pit, I mean, it's over. The ancient astronaut theory will be proven, and, everyone else will say, okay, fantastic. I mean, that'll be us. But I predict that all the scientists will say, well, we knew it all along, but we couldn't say anything because, we were at the university and we had to have, we had to remain quiet. So that's the only thing that concerns me.
Tell me a little bit about the Golden Record. What is that?
Well, the Golden Record are basically these phonograph records which were included aboard both Voyager spacecrafts, which were launched in 1977. Now, the reason why I'm fascinated about this is because not only did this record contain 55 greetings in all different kinds of languages of planet Earth, but also it contained pictures.
And it was like a map back to the planet, wasn't it?
Exactly, and it was all made out of gold, and
was it like a CD?
Yeah, I mean, almost. I mean, it's actually like a regular one of those old records that we existed before the CD came along.
Yeah.
And it works with a stylus. And and there are these drawings on that record with instructions of how this stylus or how this record would work. And they all did this with binary arithmetic because, the correct time of one rotation of the record is 3.6 seconds, and they expressed this in a unit of time of 0.7 billionths of a second, which is the time period associated with fundamental transition of the hydrogen atom, which is constant throughout the entire universe. So whoever finds this should, big emphasis on should know this. So not only do we have these greetings on there, but we also have analog pictures. Now, one analog picture on there is of Egypt, the Red Sea, and the Sinai Peninsula and the Nile. Now, that to me is already very fascinating because, allegedly, that is where we made first contact in Sumerian times with the Anunnaki. Second, one of the languages that is recorded on both of these golden records on board the Voyager spacecraft or space probe is Sumerian. Now, both you and I and all of our listeners know Sumerian is a dead language. Why on earth would they include Sumerian on that record?
Because they used to know it.
Thank you very much. I mean, that is exactly it. So could that be a hidden way of, bringing out the message?
Maybe that's their way of saying welcome back.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Oh, and another thing that's very, very fascinating is that, the record itself is electroplated with uranium-238, and, the half-life of uranium-238 decays in about 4.51 billion years. And so if you examine that record and you examine the decay of uranium-238, whoever discovers this can determine the elapsed time since this space probe, traveled into deep space. So, I mean, this is magnificent stuff. It's great that we've done this. I mean, I'm very excited about it.
Do you think aliens are here among us right now, Giorgio?
Aren't you one, George?
Well, you never know. Don't blow my cover, Giorgio.
Okay, it's just between you and me then. No one's listening. Lord Martin Rees of he's an astronomer royal of the United Kingdom. He actually just recently said that aliens could be amongst us, and we may not even be able to recognize them. And my hat goes off to that guy because he is absolutely right. Because he says that just as a chimpanzee can't understand quantum theory, it could be that these extraterrestrials are literally standing right in front of our eyes, and we can't recognize them. Now,
yes.
I don't mean that, I'm looking at you or you're looking at me and I'm an extraterrestrial, but that literally those extraterrestrials could be invisible because of their technology or their, advanced, being. Because one thing is crystal clear, that while ants live on our planet, they have literally no idea that we exist. So that could be the same way with extraterrestrials, because just like they're way more advanced, I mean, we are more advanced than ants, so that could play out exactly the same way with extraterrestrials.
All of this, as we get back to Eric von Däniken, I think ties in tremendously with the work you've been doing, both as the publisher of Legendary Times and also the Ancient Astronaut Research Center. So tell me about that center.
Well, the Center for Ancient Astronaut Research is an organization a research society that Eric von Daniken and I founded on June 17th in 1998, so 12 years ago. And we're pretty much dedicated to determining whether or not extraterrestrials visited Earth in the remote past. And as such, we publish a magazine called Legendary Times, and it's the only magazine in the world to exclusively dedicate its pages to the ancient astronaut theory. And so all, the who is who in ancient astronaut research, they all publish their latest stuff in the pages of Legendary Times magazine. I mean, Eric von Daniken writes in almost every issue. I myself, of course, write in every issue, but we've also got David Childress, Jason Martell, Zechariah Sitchin has submitted articles.
You've got some heavyweights in there. Let me tell you.
Because the thing is that there has got to be some type of a voice that is dedicated to this specific research, because we will not delve into other areas of research like UFOs or modern UFOs. See, our UFOs happened thousands and thousands of years ago. That doesn't mean that we disagree with modern ufology, but we write about ancient astronauts. And by the way, anyone who goes to legendarytimes.com tonight and clicks on free info, if you fill out the information, everyone will get a free issue tonight, and we'll send it to you. But please be patient, because
you get swamped.
Yes, exactly. And, I'm like an issue or two behind with publishing Legendary Times, but it's been such a tremendous, incredible year for me, which means, a lot of people have expressed their interest in Legendary Times, but at the same time, I'm scrambling, so I ask for everyone's patience, please, because while it looks like we're a big organization, we're really not. It's a couple of people that do this. So, I'm very appreciative of all my fans, all my subscribers, all the members of Legendary Times. I mean, it's them who keep this research going. And, whenever people ask me, how can we get involved? What can we do to help you and Eric with your research? The answer is become a member. Become a member of Legendary Times and the Center for Ancient Astronaut Research, because, that is the way how we fund our research. That is how we organize our expeditions and how we, get all the materials together. And, if you get the magazine, 64 pages, from first page to the last, it's all articles. There are no ads in there. It's all membership supported. And you've seen issues, right? You're reading it, right? You enjoy it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Of everything you've investigated, which thing really just drives you crazy? Just as incredible.
Puma Punku. Every time Puma Punku is, in my opinion, is the smoking gun. While there are other areas that I find fascinating, the pyramids, the Nazca lines, those are all great. However, Puma Punku, because when you go there, it just you shake your head, because all those stones, also what I didn't mention before, display or feature what's called vitrification, which is a occurrence that only happens if you heat up the stone to a very high temperature, and then the stone sort of melts, and then it hardens into place again, and then it has this surface as if it were a bathroom mirror. And so all the stones at Puma Punku feature exactly that. It's perfect.
Well, the story you told us about the atomic war, too, that to me is absolutely staggering.
Yeah. No, and again, the thing is that all these stories that we've talked about tonight, they happen or happened all over the world, in every culture. It doesn't mean that, none of this, for example, happened none of this happened in Europe. Of course it did. Ancient Greece is filled with these stories. So are the Scandinavian countries. Even in, the English and Irish parts of the world, in honor of St. Patrick's Day today, even that part of the world talked about legends of these weird, bizarre beings, the shining ones, who, according to those legends, came from the stars. Eric von Daniken himself, when he wrote the foreword for the 35-year edition of Chariots of the Gods, he actually admitted that, there were mistakes in the original Chariots of the Gods. Now, find me one other researcher, especially in the mainstream, who will say, yep, I made a mistake 40 years ago. It virtually does not exist. So the thing is that, Eric, one thing that nobody talks about is the fact that Chariots of the Gods not only had a question mark on the book cover, but in the book itself, there are over 200 question marks. So it's not like everything was stated as a matter of fact, but they were questions.
Right.
So now, though, with Twilight of the Gods, I mean, I've read the German version twice now, and I'm working on, Twilight of the Gods as being one of the editors. There aren't that many mistakes there anymore, and I think it's wonderful because, science has changed. New evidence has come along, and some of the stuff that will be presented in that book is completely irrefutable. The story of Ezekiel, if you look at the book of Enoch, if you look at the Apocalypse of Abraham, if you look at the Apocalypse of Baruch, they were all taken up. They were all taken up. An ascension of some kind in a fiery chariot or in the glory of the Lord. And, according to the ancient astronaut theory, the glory of the Lord or, those fiery chariots weren't necessarily, figments of their imagination, or that these people weren't necessarily experiencing a vision in their minds, but that were actual physical events where those biblical figures were taken up in some type of a machine, in some type of a spaceship, a vehicle, a vimana, what have you, because whenever they arrived, wherever they were going, they explained in very great detail that, all of a sudden they were in a new world, that a big house with, like a palace, with white walls. And on those walls, there were all these different jewels, and everything was blinking and glistening and just shiny like a sea of jewels. Now, if you ever boarded a plane, and the moment you board a plane, you look to the left and you look at inside the flight deck, you have all these different controls and these blinking lights. Now, somebody who doesn't know what that is, or who has never seen something like that before, the best way to describe something like that is this treasure chest of gold and jewels. We also have to remember that our ancestors tried to describe something with words that were at their disposal at the time. So we have not only those descriptions of these shining lights on the walls and these glowing stones, these glowing magical tablets, but also whenever they got there, the people that they were surrounded by spoke a different language. They didn't understand who they were. And also, they were always brought to the highest of the highest. And, they were taught for example, Enoch was given this tool, this fast writing tool. It was sort of like a reed. And all of a sudden, Enoch was able to write extremely fast. Now, my question is, what was that magical tool, or that magical reed that Enoch had in his hands with which he was able to write? So there are countless of descriptions like that. And I mentioned this, I think, in my last appearance on Coast to Coast, but one of the most fascinating stories is the Apocalypse of Abraham, where he also is described. And by the way, all those books used to be, like I mentioned before, a part of the Bible, but they were taken out later in the Council of Nicaea because they were deemed too dangerous. They contained too much information. And
I wonder if would they be allowed today?
Oh, you can go buy them. You can buy them at any. Well, no, you don't have to even buy them. You can just go to the library or online,
and there they are.
And there they are. I mean, they're obviously reprints, but they're called the Apocrypha.
Okay.
And the Apocalypse of Abraham describes Abraham being taken up by the quote-unquote Lord, lowercase l, and when he got to this new place, he got very sick because he describes that he was standing at a window and he saw his world down below, which was Earth, in a sea of black, by the way he describes it. And then it was as if I was falling down towards Earth, and then Earth appeared again at the top, and then I fell down again, and Earth appeared again at the top. And he was standing at a window describing this. So that is, from a modern perspective, a description of artificial gravity. If that was a wheel in space that was turning on its own axis, that is exactly what you would see if you were to stand in front of a window in an orbiting city in space. We look at all fields of science, all fields of archaeology, whether it be Egyptology or if it's ancient South American studies or African studies. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all under the same umbrella for us, and we try to draw these comparisons and these correlations because, yes, the airstrip is in Peru, and they're essentially the Nazca lines. And mind you, no one in the ancient astronaut theory has ever suggested that they were landing strips. I mean, the only thing we've ever said was that seen from the air, which is the only way, by the way, you can see them, is that all of this really looks like airstrips. I mean, they truly do look like airstrips because it's just like this giant airfield with these landing strips that look like landing strips. And then you have the figures, like you mentioned, the spider, but you also have a whale, you have a hummingbird, you have another being that's called the El Astronauta, the astronaut, with one hand pointing down to Earth and one hand pointing to the sky. And so there's all these bizarre geoglyphs that are huge. I mean, some of these lines and these bands go for as long as 23 kilometers over valleys and mountains. But the most significant thing at Nazca, for sure, are the areas where entire mountaintops have just been removed and flattened. It's as if somebody took a cheese knife and just shaved the mountaintop off because the surrounding mountains converge at a summit, and there are two mountains at Nazca where the summit is missing. And clearly, and anyone can look at the pictures, the mountaintops have been removed, flattened. And as far as the crystal skulls are concerned, all I have to say on that topic is the fact that we today, in modern computer technology, are using crystals for information storage. So is it possible that the crystal skulls, 13 of which allegedly exist on or have been deposited on planet Earth, contain information? The possibility most certainly is there.
Well, that's true. How windy is it up there on the Nazca Plateau?
Very, and that actually, is expressed that, whenever something actually grows there, it's only in shrub form, including trees. I mean, if a tree grows there, it's very stunted. So it can get very windy there. Of course, obviously it's a desert. It can get very, very hot, very, very cold at night. So it's quite an arid and hostile environment.
With Eric von Daniken's theories, when you first heard them, what'd you think?
I thought that is what adventure should be like, because I was always interested in archaeology, but looking at a shard of pottery to me is not very exciting. But if I get big walls, big geoglyphs, megalithic structures, the bigger the better. where you can't even put a dollar bill in between the fittings in some cases. That is exciting. That's excitement to me because, it just gets my mind going. How was this possible, especially in light of the fact that we ourselves today, with our modern technology, would have a hard time recreating this? Our ancestors were extremely prolific and very meticulous in writing this stuff down, and so for all that to get lost to the flames of fires, I mean, that is truly, truly unfortunate. Here's the thing. If you look at a science textbook of, let's say, 100 years ago, 99% of that knowledge, and I'm, of course, overgeneralizing, but 99% of that knowledge contained in that textbook is today obsolete. Now, even though at the time when that book was published 100 years ago, that knowledge was cutting edge. So I'll make one prediction, that 100 years from now, there will only be a few theories that will still hold true, and one of them will be the ancient astronaut theory, and one of the founders or the biggest proponent was, or most known proponent was Erich von Däniken, so respect will come. Everything in life comes down to energy, and in order to perform or conduct time travel, you need a crapload of energy. And so, to make a long story short, time travel per se, going into the past, theoretically speaking, is possible. However, we're, of course, hundreds, if not thousands of years away from actually building a machine with which we're able to actually time travel. So what physicists have suggested, or not suggested, but they've actually proven it, that the energy requirements to power a time machine are infinitely larger than what we would need to power a spaceship with which to travel from star to star. So from a logical perspective, we will first succeed in traveling to a distant star or a planetary system before we will succeed in time traveling. Now, that does not mean that I'm saying that time travel is not possible. Of course it is, or it already has been, one way or the other. But from a energy requirement perspective, we will first explore the galaxy in spaceships before we will visit ourselves in the past, due to the simple fact that the energy requirements to power a time machine are infinitely larger than to power a spaceship.
Giorgio, have you dealt with at all the Dogon tribe and their Sirius mystery of the Sirius star system?
Oh, of course. And we've actually just written a big article about this in Legendary Times. Good. And, there are so many people who have suggested that, the whole idea that the Dogon knew about the Sirius A and the Sirius B constellations is nothing but a hoax, that it was they were infiltrated, and that knowledge was given to them by some ethnologists that visited the tribe,
the French explorers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. And that really, if you dig deeper, can't be true, because the Dogon have a festival. It's called the Rice Festival, the Sigi Festival, that they celebrate every 50 to 52 years, and that coincides exactly with an orbit of that invisible companion star that they said existed, which, by the way, years later then was indeed confirmed by modern astronomy with our modern instruments. And they celebrate this festival that celebrates the orbit of the star with these wonderful, wonderful, beautiful carved masks made out of wood. And these masks have been tested, and they go back at least 1,000 years.
And how about ancient drawings, pictures that depict UFOs in the background, caves that depict astronauts and visitors? All that's fascinating.
All around the world this stuff exists.
Yes.
And that is why, you can't explain this stuff away with fantasy or a figment of the imagination, because for every fantasy story that you create, there had to have been some real spark of inspiration, something real. And to say that, all these ancient descriptions of these gods or these teachers from heaven are nothing else but, natural occurrences like rain, thunder, earthquakes, or wind. I've never been talked to by wind and rain, but these ancient texts always speak that these, occurrences that they were talked to, and that these events happened in a physical, quote-unquote, divine form. So it wasn't nature. It wasn't in their imagination of our ancestors that this stuff happened.
Well, there's no question, Giorgio, that something happened on this planet a long, long time ago, and something is probably happening on Earth-like planets throughout this universe. Who are these people? Are they messengers of God? Who knows what they may be? But there's no doubt something strange happened on planet Earth thousands and thousands of years ago.
If you want to listen to our show ad-free 24/7, access audio archives, live chat with me, and much more, you need to become a Coast Insider now. So you're telling me your grandmother, who died a few weeks ago, came and visited you last night in your bedroom, and you're not scared? Are extraterrestrials living among us? I don't know if it's true or not, folks, but we're going to find out. If you enjoy stories like these and want to learn more about the mysteries of the universe with me, become a Coast Insider now to access hundreds of our archive shows to listen anytime, anywhere. Sign up now at coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider. That's coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider.